I'm an entrepreneur, like a lot of you. Can I just get a feel for the audience? How many of you have a startup, first of all? How many of you are running your own startup already? Okay. How many of you hope to run a startup or plan to run a startup? Okay, so hopefully I should say at least one thing that's useful to one of you. So this is just stuff I've learned, all right? And I'm going to try and tell you some of it. So who am I? Well, as you've heard, this is actually me, 6 years old, and this was my first startup, actually. This is a logistics startup. I'm moving paper from one side of the garden to the other, or something. I have no idea why, but I am wearing my Superman cape, as you heard about in the story earlier. Thankfully, after this, I moved on to some real companies. And I've had 5 startups. 1 I sold, 3 fails, and 1 yet to be decided. And I left that company last Christmas. I'm still on the board, and hopefully that will exit soon. So where am I from? I'm from Cambridge. I split my time now between London and San Francisco. And I have an interest in skiing, film, and flying. Okay? And the film theme you'll see on some of my slides. So today I'm going to tell you 7 things, 7 thoughts about starting your startup and being an entrepreneur. And the very first one is desire. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you really have to really want to do it. Because running your own startup is a war, okay? Like, if you are CEO of a startup and then eventually a company that grows, everyone comes to you with problems. That's what you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Ultimately, you are the problem-solving guy. And you're going to put all this time in and hundreds of hours into realizing your vision. And if you don't have passion for what you're doing, then you're probably going to fail. So do something you love. That's the most important piece of advice if you're thinking about starting a startup. Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks, had to see 230 investors before he got funding for his first startup. And you need to have passion to go and see 230 investors without thinking, hey, maybe this is a bad idea. 230 people told him, you're crazy, coffee. You've really got to love coffee to see 230 investors and be told no by 229 of them. So me with my own company, I also pitched Rumble, my last company, to over 200 investors. And eventually we did get funding. I raised $2.5 million from 1 VC, 35 angels. But you really have to be determined. And to be determined, you really need to have passion about what you're doing. So actually, I originally wanted to fly these. I wanted to be a Royal Air Force pilot. And I wanted it so badly, at least I thought I wanted it so badly, that when I was a teenager, I even wrote and said, hey, can I try flying in one of your planes? And this is me in that aircraft. But I didn't work hard at school. I was lazy. And when I went to the Royal Air Force, they told me, if you want to be a pilot, you have great aptitude, but you have to go away for 2 years and study harder and come back, and you can probably become a pilot. And so I went away, and I started my own company. And why this was important to me is I had to realize that actually, although I talked about this for 15 years, that I wanted to be a pilot, it was a hobby for me. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. Because if I really wanted to do it, I'd have worked at school harder. And actually what I wanted to do was have the freedom to build my own thing, to create something. And that worked because Worldwide City was an e-commerce company. We built over 500 websites, and I sold that company in 2001. So you've got to love what you're doing. Number 2, have a purpose. Have a cause. Because this is what's going to not just help drive you with your strategy to follow your vision, but it's also going to be what inspires your team. Why are you doing this? Why are you creating this thing? What problem are you solving in the world? Or what problem are you solving for your country? This is a mission statement. Who recognizes this mission statement? Yeah, who is it? Anyone? Google? Yeah, that's a nice easy one. What about this one? Make the planet healthier by giving everyone access to the skills of a personal trainer. Okay, that's slightly harder because that's one of my failed startups. That's in training, all right? But the thing is, if you can articulate a vision and a destination, then it helps you make strategic decisions on the way. So a great book, which has far better advice about this than I can give you, is by Guy Kawasaki, The Art of the Start. So it talks about this, talks about having a mantra, so that you can have something to inspire and educate your team and attract the best people to work for your startup. So I highly recommend that book. So number 3, timing. Timing's really important. And the thing about good timing, especially in technology companies, is that the most exciting things are the things actually that are probably too early to market. Like the coolest things that come out, the fun things that if you're a geek, you want to go and build something amazing from, maybe, that's not the right thing to build. Maybe that's not a realistic business to build right now. What's wrong with this slide? This is a slide of social networks, right? What's missing from this slide? Okay, there's quite a lot to look at, so I'll tell you. It's Facebook. Facebook's missing from this social network slide, and that's because this is a slide that I used to represent where my company sat in 2002 when I created a location-based mobile social network. Wildly too early. 10 years too early. Completely did not judge the market, did not look at the market and say, is what I'm doing, does that make sense, will people understand? I spent 2 years just trying to educate people what a social network was. People had no idea. They didn't know what I was talking about. And we did okay. We got covered in Wired, alongside this little company called Dodgeball. Does anyone know who started Dodgeball? American company? Okay, so it's a guy called Dennis Crowley. He's the founder of Foursquare. Now, in 2005, we were both featured in Wired. Dodgeball exited to Google. We didn't. But both companies, realistically, were too early, because inside Google, Dodgeball died. So, sometimes you can think something's way too early. Sorry, it's not way too early, and it is. So if you look at the timing, Playtext was in 2002, Dodgeball started in 2003. Facebook didn't even start until 2004. Foursquare, Dennis Crowley's next company, which was basically the same as Dodgeball, didn't start until 4 years after he started the first one. So from my experience, at least 3 of my companies have failed, and a major contributing factor was because of not judging the market correctly. A really good guide for this is to some of you may know this, is Geoffrey Moore's graph here, which talks about Moore's chasm. And what happens is when new technology comes out is you get the innovators who pick this stuff up, the very first smartphones, the visionaries, people who are on the edge of technology, who like all the new stuff. And then you have this chasm that you have to cross. Will this thing become mainstream? Will other people realize its value? Or will it disappear? And there have been lots of examples in histories of services and products that have disappeared down into the chasm. With mobile, smartphones, we're probably only here. We're very, very early in the curve. We're probably Friendster in terms of where mobile smartphones are in terms of take-up. So you need to bear that in mind. If you're starting something to do with mobile, a mobile company, only 35% of the population on average have a smartphone. Now, if you go back to thinking about Facebook, when Facebook started in 2004, then over 50% of the US population had access to the internet. And when they went public in 2008, when everyone could sign up, then over 85% of people had access. So when you compare, 35% isn't that many people. And that's going to be critical when you start your business. Just to prove that there's also a counter-argument to this, is that you shouldn't be paranoid you're too late. Okay? I spent a lot of time thinking, oh my God, other people are going to be doing this, But if you have a really, really awesome product, really amazing, brilliant thing, then there's always time. So this is, what is this? This is everyone recognize this? Hello? Anyone? Hand dryer, thank you. Hand dryer, looked like this, maybe 30 years hand dryers have looked like this. And then someone invented one of these, which actually works. Do you have these in Estonia? Yeah, so hand dryer that doesn't work for 30 years, they never work very well. Hand dryer that actually works. So if your product's amazing, however late you are in the market, you're still going to penetrate the market and be successful. Okay, so don't be paranoid that you're too late to the market. Okay, number 4, team. Probably the single most important thing you have to do as a startup founder is attract an amazing team. And this is true even when you're a CEO of a big company. If you do nothing else all day but just attract and retain amazing talent, then you're doing a great job as a CEO. And the Google founders have done this. A friend of mine was one of the first guys, very early guys at Google, and he said that even when Google got to 5,000 or 6,000 people, Larry and Sergey still would look over every single CV between them, people they hired. And sometimes they'd throw them out. Because your team is everything. You cannot do everything. So first of all, get a co-founder. It's really hard to find a good co-founder because you've got to get on with them, you've got to respect them, and if you can find a good one, your chances of raising funding increases, it doubles, in fact. I think the statistic is slightly more than doubles than being a single founder. And again, this is something I made a mistake from because all my previous startups it's just been me. And the next startup that I might start next year, I'm going to have a co-founder because it's so hard that you need someone to share that burden. So the other thing to do, which is kind of a technical point but really fundamentally important, if you get a co-founder, make sure that all your equity in your business is based on founders' options. Now, if you know what share options are, the difference between shares and share options are that when you give share options to someone, they have the right to get that percentage of the company depending upon how long they stay. And if they leave, they don't have the rights to that equity within the business. So if you get a co-founder, you can just go, hey, let's do it 50-50, but then the guy fucks off, you can't do much about that. It gets really complicated. And worst case scenario, you issue a load more shares, you dilute his 50%, but then he sues you because you're prejudicing minority shareholders, or it could be a nightmare. Whereas if you issue your shares to both you and him as options, you can say that you stay a year, you get the rights to 20% or 10%, whatever it is, another year, another 10%. So if he leaves because it doesn't work out or one of you decides not to do it, then you don't have a problem. You still retain ownership in your business. That's really, really important. Quite a technical point, but if you're not familiar with shares and share options, but really important. And then finally, choose an opposite. Don't choose your mirror image, right? Choose someone who complements your skills. And that's quite hard to do as well because the most likely co-founder is someone you get on with and want to go down to the pub and have a beer with, so you're probably going to share a lot of the same interests and be interested in the same things. But you need someone who fills the gaps in your skill set. And of the people I know of startups, probably the best example of this are Ali and Andy, both very good friends of mine, run a very successful startup called Huddle. And these guys are probably the example of the best example of people I know. The guy on the right, Andy, goes out, mingles, gets drunk, parties, talks on stage. He's brilliant, very smart. Guy on the left, also very smart, but has a kid, stays at home, married, does the numbers, serious guy. Brilliant. So then, once you've got your co-founders, the third person you hire is probably going to be the most important person you ever hire. Because that third person is going to define how good the rest of your team is, to some extent. Because, and this is one of the problems with why corporates don't work, corporate hierarchies don't work, is because you hire someone and people in corporates are very protective of their domain, of their department, their business unit, their division. What happens is that people will hire more junior than them because they don't want their position to be threatened. If they hire someone better, maybe they'll get replaced. And so corporates, as you go down the ladder, become more and more dumb quite often because people won't hire the smartest people. They'll hire the people who are only just as smart as they are. And you don't. You want to hire smarter people than you. Okay, so that third person's critical. You really, really have to find someone incredibly smart. That first hire, that first employee, get the absolutely best person you can, because that will help you attract other people. So focus. Do one thing really, really, really well. You might want to take over the world. Your vision might be to, make all the world's information accessible, but do run one thing really well. This is probably the most frequent mistake I see startups doing, is they try and do too much. And I've made this mistake as well. So back to this slide again. What's the other thing that's wrong with this slide? Any thoughts? Well, if you look at all the circles, the sets here, of the different types of service that we cross over with, instant messaging, internet dating, mobile flirting, location-based services, social networking, we're doing too much. We had tons of functionality. Nobody had really an idea of what they were supposed to use us for, right? So when you have so few resources when you start a startup that you really have to do one thing well. When you do that thing well, you can expand. Don't worry. The market's still going to be there. Even Google started by doing something simple. They do lots of things now, but when they first started, they just wanted to make search better. Better and faster. That's all they focused on for the first 5, 6, 7 years. Facebook's the same. Facebook, you can do lots of things now, but when it started, it was targeted at Harvard, 10,000 people who basically wanted to flirt with each other. It's basically all it did. That's what got people hooked in. And after that, you can build on those loyal users. And the other thing is, don't, especially again, mobile, there's probably, I know that I've met some mobile startups in Estonia yesterday, don't do too many platforms. I made this mistake as well. Rumble, we supported all these platforms. It was insane. We did all of them averagely. We did none of them really, really, really well. And the thing is, if you do one of them really well, you can go to an investor and say, look at this iPhone app. It's fucking amazing. And if you give me $3 million, I'll go and do this across all the other applications, all the other platforms. And so many startups I see, and I met at least one of them yesterday, have applications across, a number of platforms because they see all these users. They think, if we just get Android and then we've got another access to another 20 million users, but you won't do it well enough. You don't have the resources. You need to iterate quickly, right? So do it on one platform. Pick one platform and stick with it until it's amazing, and then you have something proven, and you can go and get more money, or some money. And finally, golden rule, if it's not core to that first thing you're trying to do, don't add it. Again, too much functionality will kill your product. It will make it harder for you to educate the market about what you do. So do one thing really well, and don't add too much functionality. So testing. I haven't seen this film, by the way. I have no idea. I don't recommend it, probably. Testing. Once you've worked out what your vision is, you're then going to work out what you're going to build. And the thing is, you're going to make lots of assumptions about what your market wants and what your customers want. So you need to write these assumptions down. You need to say, we're going to sell bananas online. We believe that Estonian people want to order bananas online and that they want home delivery for their bananas. And that's an assumption. You're making a guess. Because until you test it in the market, you actually have no idea. You can analyze as much as you want. You can pay an analyst. You can do market research. But it's all bullshit until you actually try and see if it works. And so the best thing you can do is find a really, really quick and dirty way to test some of your assumptions. We presumed at Rumble, my last company, that people wanted better recommendations. Because I went around and I asked people, I said, God, isn't Yelp rubbish? Or isn't Time Out crap for reviews? And everyone said, yeah, it's rubbish. God, Rumble sounds great. But it wasn't true, because getting better recommendations was not a hook to use the service. People didn't care. It wasn't a painful enough problem we were solving, right? What we found was when people did become users and they realized that they got better recommendations, that would mean that they stayed with us. But it wasn't a reason for them to start using the service. So you need to really test your assumptions. And you might say, well, how do I do that if I don't build something? So I'll give you one case study, is Dropbox. Who knows what Dropbox do? You've all heard of Dropbox, great. It's a great service, you can share files, all this stuff. But when the founder was trying to raise money, he really struggled because he went to the VCs and he said, look, I've got 4,000 people signed up to my beta list who are going to want this product that I'm going to build. And, don't you think file sharing is rubbish? And the venture capitalist said, yeah, you're right. God, all the services are crap. He said, well, great, give me some money. And he said, no, because we just don't think that it's a painful enough problem. We agree that all the services have problems, but we don't think that millions of people really find this problem painful enough. And so he couldn't build his service because he had no money. The logistics, it's a complex service to build it as he wanted to build it. And so what he did was he thought, well, how do I then prove that my assumption that people have this problem is right? So he did a fake video of how his service would work if he'd built it. So it looked like, and he told everyone it was real software that he was testing. And he put this online, and then he got 70,000 people saying they wanted the product. And so then he went back to the VC and said, right, I've got 70,000 people who say they want this product that they think I've created, so now you need to give me money so I can go and build it before they get pissed off. So you need to find a way, by hook or by crook, a dirty, quick way of finding out that your assumption in the market's really true. And this applies to any startup you're doing. Because if you can do that, you can then go back to your angel investor and actually get some money off them, right? And it'll save you a lot of pain. So if you're successful with your assumption, you can then continue. If your assumption fails and you can't prove that your problem or whatever it is you're trying to prove that people want this product, then you probably need to rethink it. It's going to save you a lot of time. The best book that talks about this only came out about 2 months ago. It's the best book I've actually ever read about what took me 10 years to learn. And it's The Lean Startup. I can't recommend this book more. It's fantastic. Eric's a great guy. Brilliant book. It's all about failing fast and testing your assumptions. Definitely get that book. So, funding. Okay, so the first thing is be realistic about your funding. Everything I've built, or everything my programmers have built, has taken twice as long as they said it would or I thought it would. Always. Software always takes twice as long. So work out how long your amazing thing is you're going to build, and then double it. And that's what you should tell your investors. Because they're going to say, well, how long is it going to take to build, and blah, blah, blah. And if it takes too long, every time you miss a deadline or you're wrong with a prediction, the value of your business goes down. Your leverage with negotiation goes down. Their trust in you as someone who can deliver goes down. So never, ever believe what your programmers tell you. And if you're a programmer, don't believe yourself. Work it out, and then double it. And the other thing is that getting funding takes 3 times as long as you think it will. So work out how long you think it's going to raise some money, and then triple it. Because you do not want to run out of money. Especially, actually, if you've raised some money already. That is the worst possible situation to be in. And I've been there at least twice. And it's really painful. Because investors, however nice to you they are actually still all about the money, especially institutional investors. They have to answer to their limited partners that give them the money to invest. And they're going to choose their jobs and their company over your startup, and your valuation and what you want. They don't really give a shit. They just care about the numbers, whatever they say, right? And this has happened to me. One point with my last company, we had 3 months runway left. We did due diligence, so our investors knew, the potential investor knew how much money we had, and he stalled, and then he got to the end of December, and then they turned around and said, oh, okay, yeah, we will invest, but we want double the equity. And people will do this. So always assume it's going to take you at least 3 times longer to raise money, right? So don't raise too much money. The more money you raise, the more you are expected to deliver on, the more equity you're giving away early. So try and do a lot with a little. But also, raise as much money as you can. Because raising money is really, really, really fucking hard. And it will take 3 times as long as you think, and you won't be running your company, and you won't be focusing on what you're trying to do. So raise more money than you think you'll need. I quite often mentor startups, and they're talking about raising, well, we're just going to do 20 or 30 or 40,000 pounds in this round, or even 50. It's almost pointless, because the amount of work that goes into raising 50 is the same as the amount of work that goes into raising 100 or 150. And once you have someone who's committed 50, anyway, you can probably get some other people to follow on with more money. So actually, usually, provided you're not going to give away too much of your company, raise as much money as you can. Because it's always going to take you longer to build your product, which means you're going to need double the money, and then it's going to take you 3 times as long to raise the next round of money while you won't be running your company. Okay? And when it comes to investing, have a strategy, right? Don't be naive, because there are some nicer investors out there, but ultimately it's still a game, right? So if you put down in your deck, in your plan, that your target valuation is $1 million, you're not going to get $1 million, because they're going to beat you down probably from $1 million. So learn about negotiation, and really think about how you're going to go in and how you're going to be perceived by your potential investors. Yeah, have a plan and execute that plan. It's just like anything else. And also get to know them. Get to know investors before you need the money. Just make friends. Say, reach out and go, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Don't need any money, but because it's all about people ultimately. Investors try and make a sensible decision based upon perhaps spreadsheets or based upon your product, but really, angel investors especially make an emotional decision, right? They're investing because they believe in you, not because they believe in your product or idea. And finally, get drunk with your investors, right? I mean this sincerely. Go out and have a drink with your investors. You're getting married. If you take money off someone for your startup, it's like getting married. In fact, it's worse than getting married, right? So go out and get drunk with investors. And the only really bad experience I had with investors were the investors I didn't go and get drunk with, right? So please go out and get to know these people, because you're going to be spending, it might make the difference between you keeping hold of your company or losing your company, right? And that's it. Any questions?
What a lesson. Thank you, Andrew, for that. So questions now. You should have a lot of questions now. Yeah? Okay.
All right, first, thanks for using an Estonian startup on your slide.
Yeah.
Cool. I just signed up last week. It's quite cool.
Yeah. My question is, you were telling about raising money and then running out of cash. So
yeah.
When you're really running out of cash and raising money, how do you keep your team motivated?
It's a really tricky problem, and I've tried both strategies. I've tried being brutally honest with them, and I've also tried lying. And I think what you have to balance is, first of all, it depends on what stage your business is. Because if it's just if there's 3 of you and you have a co-founder and it's your first employee, then you can probably afford, that person knows that it's a very, very early stage company. So you can probably afford to be more honest with them. But if you have, once you get to sort of 3, 4, 5 employees, and you start to have a proper, you are an employer, I think you have to be very careful, because you have to remember that these people have taken a job because they're risk averse. And most people take a job because they want to get guaranteed to be paid at the end of the month. And I've made the mistake that I've been too honest with people, and I've given them the honest situation, but optimistically I think we're going to raise this money, and people will go out and they'll look for jobs, right? And the thing about employees, and this sounds horrible, but they expect complete honesty from you, but they're not completely honest back, right? And it's because they expect you to be honest because they're employing you and they expect their money, but they're not going to tell you if they're looking for another job, right? So to try and answer your question, if you're running out of money, I think you have to be honest at the point when, there's a very good chance that you're going to let them go at the end of the month, right? So if you get to the final month and realistically you're not going to raise money, you should probably be telling people, right, I'm sorry, I thought I was going to raise this money, but at the end of the month, probably going to have to give you a notice. But I really hope you stay, blah, 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 blah. But before then, I'd be positive. I would let them focus on their work. And so that doesn't mean lie outright, but it means, shield them from that pain. They don't need to have that stress. That's your responsibility as a CEO to have that stress.
Thank you. More questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Triin and I'm a lawyer, and I've seen quite many startups struggling with legal problems from one end to the other, and I was quite surprised that you did not mention any legal problems. So I would like to know, what is your attitude towards the legal matters, and how should startups deal with them, and when should they start dealing with them?
There's about another 70 things I could have put on the slides, but I had to pick something. I think you have to start dealing with them straight away. And the problem is, obviously when you start, there's 1,000 things you want to do, and what you really want to do is build your startup, not worry about the paperwork and all this crap. But you're absolutely right. I think it is important to get the paperwork right. And that's really why I mentioned the key thing for a founder is, obviously it's your business and you want to keep control of that business, and why people sit down, and most startups then just go, okay, we'll split the company like this, and they don't think about how those shares have been issued. Someone owns part of your company, and if that guy's not as dedicated as you, then that can be a real problem. So it's a good example of why you need to get some paperwork down. And to be honest, even if you can't afford a proper solicitor, you're still better off just writing something out yourself in plain English or plain Estonian, and on a single sheet, and saying, we have agreed on this date. That is better than nothing, because you have a paper trail. So I think you're absolutely right. You don't want to go hiring really expensive lawyers. And the other thing is, reach out to other startups that are bigger, right? Reach out to startups, walk into their office, email them and go, hey, I need a contract of employment. I need a share options contract. Go and ask, just hassle people for shit. Go and ask for stuff, right? Because people will be surprised. They won't volunteer it, but if you ask, they'll be surprisingly helpful. So that's really important. Just go and beg, borrow, and steal, but do get the legal stuff sorted out.
More questions? Yes, there is.
Thank you for a nice speech. How many co-founders do you find is the optimum to start off with? You told that more than one is good.
Well, no, I think to have two is ideal. I do know a company that I know a couple of companies that have three, and ultimately, if you have yourself and a co-founder, and there's a third person who is equally committed, that can be a good thing. But one of the problems comes when you get you don't have a clear hierarchy from the beginning of who's in charge of what. I have a friend who runs a company that they're co-CEOs, and I'm always a bit wary of that because ultimately someone's got to make a decision. So I think being very clear about which areas of the business from day one, and again, it can be a simple one-page document. You go, this person is in charge of this stuff, and then you have to be disciplined about actually letting that person make that final decision on those topics. And then if you find actually that you're continually disagreeing with all the decisions these people are making and you want to override them, then actually, maybe you should be CEO and they should be something else.
More? I have a question. I also love to compare basically the business with the family life and marriage, and you make this comparison. But I love to think about my idea as my love of my life. And usually it is. I mean, when you've got the idea, you are loving it. So for how far you can love your idea and go on and take these challenges before you actually realize that the marriage is crap. I mean,
yeah.
It will not work out.
We've all been in those relationships, right? I think it's a really good point. Because being an entrepreneur is all about determination and sticking with it, right?
Yep.
So I think that comes back to a couple of things. One is having the clear vision. Another thing is being honest about testing your assumptions that you've said about the business and putting proper measures in place. So it's all about measurement. There's a system that you can research called OKR, which is objectives and key results, and it's what Google uses internally and other companies. It's what Zynga and other companies as well use internally to set goals for the life of the business, and then for the year, and then for the quarter, and then possibly even for the month, right? And it sounds very formalized, but it's actually very useful because you need to decide what is going to be a measure of success for the next step of the business. And that next step of the business might be, a minimum viable product, your first version one of the app. It might be raising $50,000 in the next 3 months, whatever it is. But to write them down and then define what your goal is and then specify how those key results are measured. So it might be to have the most awesome, banana selling app in the Android app store. That might be your goal for the first 6 months. And that should be defined by, an average 3.5-star rating for that Android app, 1 million downloads and something else, So by going through that process, you've then got checks and balances, so you can sit back and actually look and go, well, we've missed this deadline. So, maybe this assumption about what we're trying to do is wrong, or, where is the thing? And I think the problem is because entrepreneurs are naturally optimistic, I see a lot of companies that you just drift. And you're always convincing yourself that, no, next month, if we just do this, it's going to work. If we just add this bit of functionality, everyone's going to want it. And it's usually a lie. So it's about being really brutally honest with yourself about what you need to achieve and actually writing those goals down.
But it's also true that you can't achieve it within first try. I mean, how many times you try? How many times you perceive yourself that, okay, it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right thing, let's go on, until you are like...
Well, if you go on doing the same thing, you're kind of stupid, right? I mean,
yeah, that's true.
At some point, if you bang your head against the door to get through, and 5 times you don't, get something else, get a brick or something.
So it's five times.
Well, you have to. Is this what?
It's 5 times.
No, it's setting what is a measure of success and testing the assumptions. So you said we believe people want to do this with this product, and if they don't do it, you have to decide. Well, is it because the usability is bad? And so you can then go and test that. So fine, we'll improve the usability. Right, that didn't work. So at some point, you have to, when you've tested your assumptions and you run out of options, then you just have to accept that, it's clearly your assumption was wrong. People do not want to do this. And I think that's something that startups are very bad at doing, is sitting, because it feels very process orientated. They don't sit down and decide what the measures are of defining whether you keep going or whether you pivot. And that's what American startups are incredibly good at doing. They rapidly iterate. If it doesn't work in 3 months, kill it, we'll do something else. Yeah. Okay.
Other questions? Yeah, okay. Personal. Do you take personal questions?
More personal.
Yeah, shoot.
You like
I don't care.
movies.
Yeah.
And you're a film producer. What type
I'm
of
a very,
stuff
very,
have you
very,
done?
very small film producer.
Okay, cool. What type of stuff have you produced, and where?
So I'm working on a help produce a film documentary at the moment, which is about an eccentric English aristocrat from the 1940s who thought that the Nazis were great. So he went to Germany and had tea with Hitler, and he was dating one of the Mitford twins, who were also Nazi sympathizers. And the Mitford twins were a bit like the sort of Paris Hilton of today, if you like. So he had an affair with them. And then as it got to around 1938, 39, I thought, actually, maybe the Nazis aren't very good after all. Maybe they're not very nice people. So he came back, and then he became an army commando. And then he went on the most famous commando raid in the Second World War. Was the only one to survive of his platoon of 40, and then ended up in a concentration camp. And then after that, he dated a communist spy who was arrested in the 1950s. So there's a snapshot of the documentary. That's a very good question. I don't know.
Okay, as a final question, I want to ask from you, not what is the biggest lesson you have got during the experience, but what is the latest lesson you have got?
What's the latest lesson? Ooh, that's a good one. What's the latest lesson I have got? Probably never lose control of your own business.
Okay.
So don't ever do a deal which gives someone else leverage to be able to take the business in a direction you don't want the business taken. It's probably my biggest lesson. And it's funny because for years I knew that, and then I broke my own rule. So.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
And I'm not sure if you're a lazy person, but you are a techie. So, yeah, so nice present
My
for
mother
you.
will be proud. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's true.